Now it is my pleasure to introduce this morning's guests, 4 of the 13 members of the Texas Commission on Public School Finance, which was created by the 85th Legislature at the conclusion of the first called special session last summer. Diego Bernal is Vice Chairman of the House Public Education Committee, a San Antonio Democrat. He's in his second term representing House District 123. He previously served on the San Antonio City Council. Representative Bernal was appointed to the commission by Speaker Joe Straus. Nicole Conley Johnson has been Chief Financial Officer of the Austin Independent School District since 2009. She has more than 15 years of financial management experience in urban public school districts, including time in New York and Washington, D.C. Ms. Conley Johnson was appointed to the commission as well by Speaker Straus. Dan Huberty chairs the House Public Education Committee. He is a Republican state representative from Houston, first elected to represent District 127 in 2010. He is the former president and chair of the Finance Committee of the Humble ISD Board. Chairman Huberty was appointed to the commission by Speaker Straus. Finally, Todd Williams is chairman and CEO of the Commit Partnership, a coalition of more than 200 entities working together to improve educational opportunity and attainment in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. He's also an education policy advisor to Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings. Mr. Williams was appointed to the commission by Governor Greg Abbott. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. Great. Todd, we'll put you at the last seat. You can come up here however you want. I'll put you second. Representative Bernal right next to me, and Chairman Huberty, we'll put you between Nicole and Todd. Or, oh heck, sit wherever you want. All right. I should have said, may the 4th be with you. That would have been my, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that.
I think that I had this fantasy that Chairman Huberty would be the most fashion-forward Chewbacca ever today. But I'm disappointed. Could have happened. It could have happened. Chairman Huberty, as the chair of the Public Ed Committee in the House, I'm going to begin with you and ask you, why is there even a commission? I think a lot of people are wondering, this is an issue that has been in the water for a long time. You've been, in essence, studying it for decades. And by the way, you haven't been able to get it right, or at least fix it. What is the benefit of a commission? Just fix the damn thing.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good night. Look. I think that Chairman Taylor and I have had long talks about this over the last session, the session before that. Speaker Straus, that was a big issue for him this past session. He really wanted us to focus on that, and Diego and myself and the rest of our Pub Ed Committee spent the first 4 weeks of last session, going through this entire process. Clearly it's a complex problem. We get that.
Right.
We tried to put a plan together. Albeit that we know that the money that we were talking about was a deferral. We know what we were talking about in doing that process. Obviously, we were not able to come to a deal and put the additional resources that we wanted to be able to do last legislative session. And with the Supreme Court's ruling in 2016 that, hey, it's your responsibility to go fix it.
Lawful but awful.
Lawful but awful. I think we've seen the last of really the Supreme Court's, weighing in on this particular issue, especially the way you think about politics has changed.
Right.
And so, the alternative was to go back through this and really in a public forum, and I know Chairman Brister's here in the back, and he's probably scratching his head and wondering what he got himself into during this whole process, but it's been very healthy debates, been very healthy discussion, and things that we didn't really talk about because we didn't have time during the session to be able to deal with. So we're vetting a lot of those particular issues. Right after this, we have another work group. We're going to talk about special education because I think that was a huge missed opportunity last legislative session to be able to deal with that. And we're gonna bundle it all up, and then Diego and myself and other members of the House and the Senate get to decide if we actually want to try and fix it.
Representative Bernal, let me stay with you for a second as the other insider, as it were, of the group here. Would you blame anybody outside the legislature for being cynical about this process and saying, you guys are just kicking the can down the road? This is a non-solution masquerading as a solution?
I think that's the way most people feel. I think
on the commission also?
No. Well, on the commission, I think that their perspectives are moving around.
Yeah.
For example, we had a great, normally I wouldn't say this, but we had a great hearing yesterday where we talked about two things in particular that we know would actually work. And they're not school finance fixes, but they're education fixes. But otherwise, outside of the legislature and the commission, I feel like school finance is one of those things that everybody really cares about and are resigned to the idea that it can't be fixed. I honestly believe that there's more hope of like curing cancer than there is fixing school finance.
That's unbelievably depressing.
But you know probably better than anyone else in the room that that's probably also true. And so I believe that part of our job is to do something real and do it in a way where things are actually different. What we talk about all the time in the committee is if people can't feel what we do at home, it doesn't count. So you can move things around and change numbers and decimal points, but if people don't feel, if kids don't feel it, if teachers and principals don't feel it, it doesn't count. And I think that's what we're shooting for.
Ms. Conley Johnson, so to that point about do people back home feel it, you work in the belly of the beast, right? You're inside one of the big urban school districts in Texas, and you've been there for a long time. Does what they do matter to you? On a daily basis, do you think about them?
Absolutely. I mean, it impacts everything that we do, from sort of setting policy and sort of how we take on our approaches to developing our own budgets and resource allocations. Obviously, depending on, I think there's a lot of keen interest in our community in trying to solve this issue. The property tax burden that I would say Austinites are shouldering, I would say it's probably disproportionate to what you would experience in other parts of the state.
And is that the door through which people consider this issue? I mean, I think about civilians and non-civilians. So you think civilians think about this issue in terms of how it directly impacts them, and that is most specifically through property taxes? Property
taxes and the fact that we're contemplating significant budget cuts. We're talking about cutting programs and services. And I beg to differ to say that school districts aren't efficient. To say school district budgets are tight probably gives them more wiggle room than they actually have. I mean, we went through all the efficiency cuts back in
You think 2011. Tight would be an improvement?
Tight would be an improvement.
Right.
And so now we're at the point of cutting programs that are very important to our communities. We're looking at consolidating schools, and no matter what community you're in, affluent or low income, nobody wants to close a school. So these are the kinds of difficult and challenging trade-offs and decisions that school districts are being forced to make. So it's always, keenly important. We're always hyper-focused on it because it has an impact on the services and supports that we're able to provide our communities. So I think the property tax for some is an important issue, and it's an important issue here. We have gentrification, and we have a property tax burden that's affecting, all of our communities, and so we're trying to find that balance. But we certainly know that you can't really solve the property tax issue without solving school finance.
Well, every issue is intersectional these days, right? That's how that goes. Mr. Williams, the other way in which the general public, civilians, become aware of the work of the legislature, or of the lack of work, as it may be in certain cases, is through the view they have of the quality of public education. It's not simply an economics problem for them, it's also a performance problem. And the general view is that Texas public schools could be better. We could disagree about how they could be better, but I have to believe that civilians look at the quality of public schools and think, we need help, and that help may come from these guys. We've been talking about that for years.
Yeah, so I'm come from a city that has 160,000 kids in Dallas ISD, 90% economically disadvantaged, 40% English language learners, doing a tremendous amount of systemic reform within the district, because our city does not view our education system as a leading competitive edge. We're competing, I think, against Austin for Amazon headquarters too, right? And trying to figure out how do we communicate all the reforms that are ongoing, and frankly, the ability to sustain those reforms is really important, because we are now the largest district in the country that evaluates all our teachers. We're significant increase of in-district choice. We're doing PTEX high schools with industry partners. We're massively expanding PreK, but we're entering Recapture next year, despite the fact that we are 90% economically disadvantaged.
And you think that the district, you've said, in fact, you were on Twitter last night exchanging notes with the trustee Miguel Solis, the DISD, about how on the one hand you believe that the district is really innovative, but the public's perception is very different from your perception.
Correct.
The public does not believe you're doing a good job.
Because the public has basically, a lot of people who respond to those polls have opted out of the public school system, so they're not actively engaged in it.
Pollsters are the problem, right? That's that they're polling the wrong people.
It's true. I mean, at the end of the day, the school district needs help, and it is making significant improvement relative to other urban districts in the state. But at the end of the day, we can't continue those reforms if I'm cutting librarians and cutting counselors and not being able to follow through with funding on the commitments that we've made. We've made some really hard choices up there, and we're tired of trying to cut to greatness.
Yeah. Before we go on, let me just ask, understand how the commission works. You three were appointed by Speaker Strauss. You were appointed by Governor Abbott. There were a certain number of others appointed by Strauss and Abbott, and then Lieutenant Governor Patrick appointed some as well. Are you carrying the water for your patrons? Have you been given a charge from the people who appointed you to advocate for certain positions, or are you free actors as far as this goes?
I'm a free actor.
You all are free actors?
Absolutely.
Right, so you may come back, the commission may come back, or you may individually arrive at things that are not 100% aligned with the person who appointed you, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say this, is that I think everybody, or not everybody, that some of you know that I actually carried this piece of legislation during the regular session and
you did.
Shot it myself because I felt like we had the opportunity to fix it during the regular session. So
yeah.
We ended up here because, you know, Chairman Taylor and I talked about it. He says, let's give it a chance to be able to do it in a meaningful way,
right,
with, you know, all the different entities represented, meaning governor's office, lieutenant governor, and the speaker's office. I haven't had one conversation with Joe about this. I don't know about you, Diego, but, you know,
no.
Speaker Strauss, you know, management style is, you know, put the people in charge that know what they're doing.
Let them do
their job. Right.
Yeah.
And he knows where I stand.
So this is effectively, as you described this, Chairman Huberty, this is effectively the second called special session, and there's one item on the call.
That's right.
And it's for an unbounded period of time.
Correct.
Right? That's really how we should think about this.
That's right.
Representative Bernal, are there expectations that we all should have about the work product of this commission? At the end of the day, what are you all going to give us for this?
That is a great question, Evan.
That, by the way, we had some crowdsourced questions over the course of the last couple of weeks, and that was a question that came up more than one time.
Yeah.
Was what should we expect from you?
Honestly, I think the expectations are low, but I would, if people had consistently higher expectations and accountability for us, hopefully we come up with something that really is meaningful. Right now, I couldn't tell you what that is. I feel like we're inching towards some programs that might be helpful, but I'm not sure we're scratching the surface of reforming the system. We had close to $2 billion to put into the system last session that we didn't do so we could do this. In that way,
you know, Representative Bernal, that is in dispute. The Senate disputes whether that money was available.
Right,
that's one of the fundamental disagreements about this.
The Senate. I think the Senate has a fundamental dispute with anything involving math.
Please, seriously. Please, Representative Bernal, don't hold back.
Even
I already got all my legislation filled last session. I don't need it again.
What I mean by that is that even in the commission, we have disputes over simple math. And so, to answer your question, I think if people held us accountable and demanded that we come up with something, that would actually be helpful.
But what measure of accountability is there? You have no Republican opponent on the ballot. Huberty has no Democratic opponent on the ballot. There's no accountability at the ballot box. This is Texas.
Well, I also think that what's happening is that school finance and schools in general are becoming an important issue. I think it was sort of subterranean for a number of years, and now it's bubbling up. And so, yes, I don't have an opponent, but that doesn't mean that people can't make my life hard or gear someone up to run against me if I don't deliver on it.
So accountability may be a longer tail, but not immediate. Sure. From that perspective. Mr. Williams, I asked you this question the last time we had a conversation on the phone. I want to ask it of you in public. Is the reason that we have not fixed this problem recently or over time an economics problem or a politics problem?
My personal view is a couple of things, that it is a political problem, and part of that political problem is that I think one of the problems is that business has not gotten as engaged as it should be because they are the one that are bearing the burden of what our education workforce pipeline looks like.
Yeah, so you think that if special interests, that's a pejorative phrase, but I don't mean it pejoratively, if special interests aligned and marshaled their forces and effectively marched on the Capitol with pitchforks and torches and demanded this of both parties, you believe that pressure might have an impact politically?
I think it would, especially if it involved businesses and willingness to increase their investment through revenues, because we're not going to cut our way to success here.
Yeah.
That's right.
We've got, think about this. Every year, the state of Texas produces 200,000 high school kids who 6 years later don't have a living wage credential. Over a decade, that's 2 million people, adults, right? It has significant cost, incarceration costs, uninsured medical, dependency costs, et cetera. It's a huge, we figured out in this study that it's effectively at $1 million a kid, that's roughly $200 billion per graduating class. That's about 1/8 of our economy because we don't maximize the human potential of our graduates. Yeah. So that's a huge opportunity for business, right? And we're having, in Dallas, we have 40-something thousand unfilled mid-skills jobs that only require an associate's degree, and we're having to import significant amount of talent from outside the region, outside the state to fill it.
Right.
While we lead the country, or Houston, think about this. Houston and Dallas are the two of the leading cities in job growth in this country. Our economy is on fire. We are also number 1 and number 2 in child poverty. How do you have that? How do you have such a disparity between that? It's because we're not educating our way. We're not having poverty. We're not having education solve poverty. We're having, unfortunately, in some ways, we're perpetuating poverty because we're not maximizing what we can do with our kids. And we know what to do. Yeah. It's pre-K. It's early college. It's all sorts of things.
Yeah. So you think that the toolkit is there. We know what the tools are. We just choose not to deploy them.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. There's no mystery.
Nicole, let me ask you. You said that Chairman Brister is in the back. Justice Brister is in the back somewhere. I want to quote him actually from a story that we published in the Tribune a few months ago. This is Scott Brister. You've got to figure out where you would like the schools. Let me say it again. You've got to figure out what you would like the schools to look like before you figure out whether you need more money, or less money, or where that money is going to come from. That is at least Scott Brister's articulation of the challenge before all of you when it gets to this question of spending money on public education. Nicole, do you believe that you know where you're going so that you can work backwards from that? What is your goal? What is your ultimate goal for public education that you then work backwards from to decide what the fix ought to be?
Well, it's similar to what Todd has said about making sure that our students are adequately prepared for a career in life. Right now, we know that most of our kiddos are not sustaining or persisting after they graduate college. Many of them don't have access to the pathways of careers that we need because we can't build out the robust systems internally in our districts. So our goal is to prepare our students for, a future, a dichotomy, a global workforce that goes well beyond what they're measured on today. We know that our kids need competencies and skills, and they need to be able to apply them in the workforce. And so school districts are struggling, right? We're trying to create a diversity of offerings that will give our students the rigor and the kinds of technological and technical skills that they need to be proficient. Yeah. But you just can't build out adequate programs to deliver that support because of the funding constraints. And so I didn't participate in this commission to see it as sort of a zero-sum game. I'm hoping I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, because again, there's not enough. It's insufficient now. Yeah. And so we've got to close up the gap. And, most of us are adopting deficit budgets that can last a couple of years. But we also have to be forward-thinking. We have to sort of shoot beyond what we're currently sort of operationalizing around, and we have to sort of recognize the fact that we have to do more for our students for them to be successful.
The goal that you just articulated in long form, or what Mr. Williams said about pre-K and PTAC and early college, high school, and all that, do you think that those goals are shared universally within public education? If I had the CFO of the Canyon Independent School District or of the Roscoe Independent School District, would you see all over the state a consistent view, Nicole, of what the goal is?
I think that there is some understanding about the need to strengthen the rigor in terms of what we're offering for our students. But it's about how to get there. It's like school finance. Everyone agrees it's broken, but there's disagreement in terms of how do we fix it, how do we solve it, what goes first. And not everything, what works in one school community doesn't work in another school community. Right. I mean, districts are very different. And so the approaches might sort of take on the nuances and the values of those local communities. Austin is, it's very progressive. We like to support those kinds of endeavors that, really push our kids towards arts and sustainable environmental sort of programming and learning. that might not be the value of another school community.
Right.
And so I think that there are some basic tenets that you can apply across all school districts. I think PreK is one that I think most would agree that the juice is worth the squeeze. If you put that investment in, the payout, the ROI is there. But certainly there are other programming that are more important for some that might be more career tech. In Austin, it's a combination because we are a diverse community. We have to have a wide range of offerings and goals to serve all of our students. Right. And then we have the property tax issue. I think Austin's unique in that, and our property taxpayers, almost over 52% of what we're going to collect in tax collections next year will go to the state.
More than 58%.
So we're going to send more to the state, $40 million more, $670 million to the state, and we only get to keep about $629 million. So this is like the flip. The first time we'll be sending that substantial amount of dollars. And so when you talk to property taxpayers and they realize that $2,200 of their tax bill is actually state, that's huge. That's over half of the tax bill.
Let me ask Chairman Huberty to fact check you, Ms. Conley Johnson. Does everybody think that pre-K is a good thing around this? If I asked any member of the legislature, or if I asked everybody in every school district around the state, is the juice worth the squeeze on pre-K? Would they say that, Chairman?
Well, being the fact that I carried Governor Abbott's bill in the prior session and the difficulty I had at the end of getting that done, I think it became a political, I wouldn't say problem, but it became political, unfortunately. And I think what the issue was...
What's political about pre-K?
Yeah, well, let me tell you, there was some conservative groups that came after me and he called it socialist and godless. I don't think anybody's, was confused about that. But what was interesting was that they thought we were pulling these kids out of their parents' arms when the reality is that we already had pre-K for half the population anyways. Yeah. And would I like to see it expanded? Absolutely. Look, you cannot dispute the fact that the development of a child's brain is almost fully functional at age 5. And so the children that are going to, the parents have the opportunity to put them into a pre-K program or an early learning child education program or something along those lines, those children do much, much better. So we're going to pay, look, we're paying for those kids. You're either going to pay for them on the front end or you're going to pay for them on remediation. That's just a fact. Yeah. That is indisputable. The facts are there, and we have to do it. Now, look, the cost is, we heard yesterday, the cost is, $500 million a year, so it's about $1 billion over the biennium. How do we become more efficient? Is there different ways to, accelerate children through high school? There's a lot of different ideas that we can come up with and we can start talking about and trying to figure out, the ability to create those resources. One example would be is that, in the case of Austin or Dallas or other places that offer, a full day pre-K where they're not getting reimbursed, let them take it off their recapture payment. I mean, those are ideas that we need to be talking about when we go into the next legislative session because I think those make sense.
Do you begrudge a community like San Antonio, which several years ago decided to take matters into its own hands and pass a modest increase in taxes to fund, I think it was 22,000 is that 4-year-olds were in full day? Representative Bernal, is that right?
Right.
Do you begrudge communities saying if the state won't do this, get out of the way?
Absolutely
You guys talk about local control. The locals are going to control this issue.
No, absolutely not. Because again, I was part of Humble ISD school district that had has that problem, which is fast growth, low wealth, and our community went out and did the TRE, and we're $1.17. So, and I understand what you're saying. You're sending all your taxes back. Your tax rate's lower than our tax rate. Your tax rate is much lower, and I hear that from people. And so there's about 400 school districts that are out there that are the maximum cap rate of $1.17. We also need to solve that problem because even if those communities wanted to be able to pay for additional services or to be able to pay for them, they can't. We don't give them the tools to be able to do it because we say, hey, we're not going to let you do that. We have to solve that problem.
Well, we're going to come into the property tax, I promise you, in a second because these issues are so related. Representative Bernal, what about the idea that if you've seen one school district, you've seen one school district? That's essentially what Ms. Conley Johnson is saying, that you can't really say that what works in Austin works in Roscoe or what works in Orange. And doesn't that make it difficult to build a school finance plan that applies to the entire state? This is really a quilt, not a blanket.
Yes and no. First, I'm not sure that's exactly what she said. I think there are some things when you talk to educators around the country, take us out of it. If you talk to the educators around the state, there are some tenets that are universal. we haven't heard one educator say pre-K doesn't work. We haven't heard one educator say we don't need more help with our ELL students. We haven't heard one educator say give us the resources to deal with our growing number of poor students.
Yeah.
Those are universal tenets. And then in that, to sort of bridge the gap, there needs to be some flexibility to do it in a way that makes the most sense. But for the most part, there are maxims that educators have come through and said over and over and over again from every corner of the state would work for them if we would just do it. Pre-K was one of them.
Yeah, well, and the governor has made pre-K a priority, but there's been the devil's always in the details. There's been a disagreement about how much to spend. There's been a disagreement about half-day versus full-day.
I don't think there's disagreement.
It's not as simple as saying pre-K.
I don't think there's disagreement about half-day versus full-day anymore.
You don't?
No, absolutely not. I think that
Chairman Huberty, do you agree with that? That within the building?
Within the building, absolutely.
I think within the building there's absolutely disagreement.
But not among educators, and I think that's sort of the problem.
But educators don't get to decide.
Well, that goes back to the accountability conversation we had earlier, right?
Yeah.
Which is, is pre-K a priority? I guess it was, and then it wasn't, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
Right?
Mr. Williams, Ms. Conley Johnson, Chairman Huberty, Mr. Bernal, do you all accept the proposition that more money is necessary? Anybody disagree that more money is part of the solution?
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
You don't disagree?
I don't disagree.
Everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Do you think the money that's being spent by public education right now is being spent wisely? This is often a criticism. When you get up to the line of should we spend more money on public ed, there are a number of people who will, not a huge number, but there are a number who will push back and say, yeah, but with the money they're getting right now ought to be spent better. Chairman Huberty, I was in your hometown of Houston 2 nights ago, went to the Astros game. And I was staying at the Marriott Marquis where they have that amazing swimming pool that is shaped like Texas. And I tweeted out a picture of the swimming pool. And somebody tweeted back, which ISD is that? I thought, note that for Thursday. There is a perception, whether it's scoreboards or Texas-shaped swimming pools or whatever, that somehow the superintendents and school boards of the state are profligate spenders, drunk sailors, basically. Is that a legitimate criticism?
Yes, it is. And I was part of the school district that when we had a football stadium that was 40 years old, and we share it with 5 high schools, and we were going to just replace the press boxes and whatnot. And then we really did the engineering and looked at it and said, geez, we really need to place the stands because these things are going to fall down. We have to replace them in 10 years. So we made a business decision. We spent as little as possible on a 6A football stadium. And I think at the time we spent maybe around $15 million to replace the current stadium that we had.
Yeah.
When I see school districts spending $90 million or putting in water parks and doing things of that nature, those people should be very careful, depending on whether I'm chairman or not chairman, but I'm assuming I have enough seniority to be on the Pub Ed Committee, to be careful to come in front of us next session.
It's not a good look.
It's not a good look. You can't do that. Now, I get it's bond money, and I get that those voters get to decide. I understand all that. But, again, we're having elections in May where voter turnout is very, very low. And I've talked to school districts and school boards around the state, and it's about wants and needs. What do you need versus what do you want? And present yourself in such a way that if you're financially responsible and fiscally responsible, then we're going to be able to stand up for you. But when you go out and you spend and you build water parks, because we have a school district that has done that,
right?
That is indefensible to be able to come and say, well, we built it because it's an opportunity. You know what? That is not your job. If your city wants to do that, that's fine, but that is not an ISD's
not the job. I'm supposed to tell you if you have cards with questions on them, raise them, and Bobby Blanchard will come around and grab them from you. Mr. Williams, you wanted to get into this conversation.
I think I just wanted to make the case that I would just ask that we not extrapolate indefensible exceptions in certain school districts to that's what all school districts
because they're
are.
exceptions.
Yeah. They are exceptions. Right. I think the average age of a school building in Dallas ISD is probably 50 to 60 years old.
Yeah.
And they have been, we've struggled to pass bond elections in the past in terms of frequency. When we do pass them, they tend to be well supported. But I don't see a lot of water parks in Dallas ISD.
But Mr. Williams, the problem is though is that when and again I was on the boards and I supported bond referendums and I support my community is going through one now. I get it, we need it, you know, it's important for the growth, and they're trying to be as responsible as possible. Go out and talk to the community. Here's the issue, though, is when you're inside the building and you're inside on the floor of the House, and you've got members of my party, most particularly, that stand up and sit there and say they have enough money because they do things like that. Because and it's one or two or three examples, it creates a problem. And so then we have to go and say, oh, well, it's just this one district, it's this or that or the other. And it's just, you know, most of our colleagues don't spend a lot of time on public education. They look at the sound bites and the Twitters, and just like you had your response, oh, whose ISD is that? That's the kind of thing that people lump on. And again, and that's the INS side. The M&O side is completely different. And that's the problem, is that we haven't people can't bifurcate these two issues. And so we have to be able to do that as we go forward. You know, I get that, you know, and shame on the state, because we should be providing educational buildings. We haven't increased the existing debt allotment. We tried last session, you know, some additional facility funding. We used to fund the majority of buildings in the state of Texas. Now we don't. And we have some of the largest debt in the country, you know, as a result of that. So.
Representative Bernal, you know, the pushback occasionally when you talk about increasing spending for public education is, well, can't we possibly add by subtracting? Aren't there things they can stop doing? Can't we cut superintendent salaries? Can't we cut administration and redirect dollars? Before we talk about spending new dollars, why can't we spend old dollars on the things that you're talking about? Do you think there's any room within most school districts to do that?
I think that there's always some room, but really not much. As Nicole said, districts have been cutting for a long time. And also, you know, when they say things like that, they're not really thinking about real dollars. Okay, if you save $60,000 here, what does that mean when you've got a $3 million problem? Right. I don't know where our water park is. I don't know where Austin's water park is. I honestly also think that we have to call a spade. I don't think there's a lot of people on the House floor who were on the fence about school finance, and the water park pushed them over to the other side. I think they.
I would have supported it, but for
that. But for the water park. Never mind. I'm going this way. I don't think that that's real. I think that part of our job and part of the job of the public is to say this is important. This is why there in every instance, in every place, in every venue, there are going to be some bad actors, but you cannot allow the bad actors to color the whole group, and I think that's the case here.
Nicole, you talked about recapture. Austin is obviously, I think Austin has the biggest recapture payment, does it not? Right now, it's 500 and...
This year, 546 million.
46 million.
Yeah, and we represent about almost 25% of the total collections.
Right. Mr. Williams talked about Dallas about to enter recapture. Houston, of course, has been very publicly battling over recapture for the last year plus, to the point that they cut a deal with the TEA to reduce their recapture payment. The part of me that wants the world to be perfect and everybody to help everybody and, you know, peace, love, and all that, says, what's wrong with those who can helping those who can't? The theory behind recapture is that Austin has more and there are parts of the state that have less. And the theory of the whole plan as constructed was that we're one state, we want everybody to rise to a basic level. Like, isn't that theory still, doesn't that still make you feel good? Isn't that still like a kumbaya moment? And I understand that as it's executed practically, it's problematic. Yeah. But is there anything wrong as a principle?
I don't think so, absolutely not. I understand the need to equalize, right? We want all students across the state to have what they need to be successful. And we need to certainly all, you know, support that notion. However, I do feel like the issue with recapture is because the other components of the funding formula are so outdated, and they need careful adjustment and alignment that it puts it sort of highlights the perversion. Recapture highlights that perversion in the funding formula. So because Austin's CEI is so outdated, it doesn't reflect the Austin of the day. Meanwhile, recapture is a market instant benefit that the state sort of you know, gets the benefit of. And so those market adjustments are automatic and they are sent to the state. Meanwhile, the other components of the funding formula are over 30 years old. The cost of providing services are greatly different. The actual needs of students are sort of far from where we were just even 5 years ago. And so those components of the funding formula, the comp ed weights, the bilingual weights, because we're serving more students in need of language acquisition services. We have almost half of our students qualify under free and federal poverty guidelines. So those kinds of components of the funding formula don't comport with the level of recapture that Austin is facing. And so if we were to improve those components, the recapture burden wouldn't be so significant. But because that is something that is current, it's market driven, and the others are 30 years old and languishing and need some retouching, that is what is sort of creating the tension between equalization and cutting programs. We don't have enough to stay adequate, but yet we're sending more and more, and taxpayers are sending more to the state. I think Austin wants to equalize, and they always want to give in. They recognize the need to support other students across the state. But
even Austin has its limits.
Everybody has their limits.
Right, yeah. Mr. Williams, can you fix, to Nicole's point, can you fix school finance without fixing the property tax? Or maybe I should ask it in reverse. Can you fix the property tax without fixing school finance?
My general view is that you have to address the property tax situation. It's unsustainable. I think as a state,
what's the sequence?
Well, I think here's the challenge we have. Most states have 4 revenue sources: sales tax, property tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax.
Yeah.
We effectively have taken 2 of those off the table. We have no personal income tax, and we're not going to go there as a state. There's no political will to do that. And we have really no corporate income tax. We have a margins tax, which we've been cutting recently. So we're trying to do everything based on 2 legs of the stool instead of 4. We just had some studies come in that said that if you look at our total tax rate relative to our GDP, we're 12th lowest in the country. But we're putting a lot of burden on property tax. So the question is, what is the political will to develop other resources in addition to making sure that districts are being as efficient as possible?
Well, the messaging, Mr. Williams, is that we're overtaxed. I mean, the fact is we may have a pretty low tax burden relative to other
Based
folks.
on the data that I saw,
but that's Chairman Huberty, are there any taxes new taxes you'd be willing to consider?
Oh.
Did you say no, or did you?
No, I said whoa.
He got excited.
I said whoa.
He got excited.
I think you have to think about it a little bit differently, though. And here's what I would say. I've been in favor of a consumption tax in exchange of a property tax for many years.
Right.
I think we heard during our commission hearing a lot of different loopholes within the system that have been created by some of our lobbyist friends and groups and special interest groups throughout the state of Texas that we need to take a serious look at. Nicole's situation of, the huge recapture payments and Humble ISD's problem of the maximum tax rate, we're taxing people out of their homes. So if you want to solve that problem, you have to shift the burden of the tax. That's just factually accurate. We can't put our head in the sand and suggest that we can't look at other alternatives.
Is there a loophole, Mr. Huberty, Chairman, that you're willing to talk about out loud? There's a candidate for governor this year who has talked about the commercial property appraisals being lower than they ought to be, and that if you were basically correctly appraised commercial property, that you could conceivably bring as much as $5 billion back into the system.
Well, I think that, I've talked about this, and Diego's looking at me and smiling because I spend my career in real estate, and I understand that business better than most, and I can tell you that commercial property owners feel that they do pay their share of that.
And that would in fact practically speaking, be a tax increase on business.
Absolutely would be a tax increase on business. And if you increase the value of a building and they've got common area maintenance charges, you're passing those costs on to those business anyways, right? But look, there's little things in this world. You look at is there a tax on it? You go to the gas station and you buy a bottle of water at the gas station. You don't pay tax on that. You know why you don't pay tax on water? Because how'd you used to buy water 30 years ago? You used to buy it in a gallon jug and you needed it when, the water went bad. Things of that nature. So there's little things within our system. But we have to find meaningful tax relief. We have to find meaningful property tax relief. And I know Senator Betancourt he's part of we've got 3 different groups. We've got the expenditure groups, which we're meeting right after this. If you want to, all of you come over and listen to that. That'd be exciting for you. And we have that. And then we've got the outcomes group, which I know Diego is part of that group, and they're working on the outcomes. And I know Mr. Williams is as well, meaning the money we're putting in, what results are we getting, and then finally the revenue source.
Right.
And that's the most important. That's the most important one, because we're going to figure out what it costs, and then you figure out where you're going to get your revenues from. I'm willing to have that discussion and have that debate and talk about it. I mean, those are things that we have to do to be able to be responsible. You look at things and you say, how do you, even like, how do we pay for our roads anymore? So we don't have any money to pay for our roads. People don't want to do toll roads. We're losing infrastructure. And,
population is doubling.
Population is growing.
Right?
And I need people to be able to go and to be statesmen. And if you run for office, you ought to be able to make tough decisions. And I'm tired of, of standing there and taking votes to be able to move the state of Texas forward and then get the crap beat out of me during the election cycle because I'm not conservative enough. Well, those people can, they don't need to be there if they're not going to make the decision. This is going to be a tough session. This is going to be reminiscent, I believe, because of Hurricane Harvey. This is going to be like what it was like in 2011.
Well, I want to come to that. Mr. Williams, I'm just going to Representative Bernal for 1 second and ask you the same question I asked Chairman Huberty, which is, are there taxes that you're willing to consider? We have a question from the audience, which I suspect is probably on the minds of a lot of people. The fact is that the current tax system is seen by many people as regressive already. Are there things that are not regressive that you'd be willing to consider that might not pose a disproportionate burden on people at the lower end of the ladder that you think could be deployed on behalf of properly funding education?
Yeah, I think it's a long discussion. I was looking at this with my staff the other day. I don't have a good answer yet, but there's a book. There's a book of exemptions that we give that we could look at. I think what Chairman Huberty's talking about on the commercial real estate piece, I just think we need to have the conversation. I'm not saying that's the answer or not the answer, but I filed that bill 2 sessions in a row, and it was killed before it got started. I'm not, maybe if we study it, it turns out that you're absolutely right, and we should stay away from it.
I usually am.
Well, it happens. Your fashion choices tell us everything we need to know. Sometimes
You're just jealous.
Sometimes I call him Chairman Sherberty.
I did it today.
That's a good one.
Don't use that. Come on.
But I think that, like, for example, though, for example, on that issue, the chairman may be absolutely right, but we have filed bills to say, let's study it. Let's figure out what the burden is versus what the benefit might be, and those bills are killed before they start. Right. And so maybe that's an answer, but I won't know it unless we study it. The chairman is at least willing to have the conversation, but some of these bills get killed by leadership before they even start.
Mr. Williams, let me ask you two quick points. I don't think we have a ton of time remaining, and I want to get as many of these audience questions in as possible. Chairman Huberty mentioned Harvey. The cost of the Harvey rebuild is going to be in excess of a 2-year state budget, probably by some order of magnitude. I mean, we know what the estimates are. If you ever built a house, you know what they tell you on the front end it's going to be. It's almost always more expensive. This was already going to be a bad session. There were plenty of cans kicked down the road already. Yep. It's fixing to get worse. Why should anybody who cares about public education spending be optimistic about next session being a better session than the last one in view of the challenges? The Commissioner Morath testified to Senate Finance a couple weeks ago that 1.5 million kids enrolled in Texas public schools, almost 1 out of every 4, are negatively impacted by the storm, and that the amount of tax base that was lost in the hurricane-affected areas was $1 billion. Mm-hmm. Why is this not just basically rearranging the deck chairs now?
It's hard. I agree. It's hard to be optimistic, and it's going to be particularly hard to be optimistic if the business community doesn't get engaged and involved. I just truly believe it. As someone who is an outsider, who has really been drinking from a fire hydrant in terms of school finance for the last 12 months to get up to speed on this issue, the thing that has always just confused me about this is that it seems like we come every 2 years and we're handed a budget and we're told what revenue we have, and then we basically just try and make Sophie's choices among these issues. Yet we have a goal that was set by the governor and endorsed by the Higher Ed Coordinating Board that said 60% of our kids need to have a post-secondary education by 2030 if we really want to have the Texas economy that we want. So we never.
And they're about 40.
We're at 40% today. Our own pipeline is producing 24%. So the only way we get to 40 is we import all this educated talent. We can't import our way to 60 by 30. There's just the math just doesn't work. So the question is, I think we should be asking, how much money do we need to spend as effectively and as efficiently as possible to get us to the goal? Instead of, we got what we got and we're just going to try and make some really tough choices. Because it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're going to have the same conversation every 2 years. And I'll say one thing and I'll stop. Yeah. We've had 9 years of recovery. We have a very reformist, innovative commissioner. We have a year-long commission, which, as you say, is an extended special session. If we don't do it now, when are we ever going to do it?
Yeah. Well, typically what happens is the gun is put to the heads of legislators by the Supreme Court, only it didn't happen in this case, so there was no motivation beyond you oughta.
That's right.
And it turned out it didn't happen. Ms. Conley Johnson, a question from the audience. What are we going to do about teacher pay as it relates to this question of school finance? How problematic is the question of what teachers are paid to our ability to succeed from a performance standpoint compared to other places?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably one of the most important issues as it relates to sort of public finance. We know that, you know, teacher quality is sort of the one unit of change in terms of effectuating our students' lives. And so I know in Austin, our average teacher salary is about $2,400 below the state average. Our teachers have the lowest pay, when compared to our urban and our local counterparts. And it's greatly affecting our ability to be able to recruit and retain high quality talent in the classroom where it matters the most.
And yet if you talk to Commissioner Morath about the challenges that the state faces going forward, precipitous population growth, rapid urbanization, demographic inevitability, his answer to all of those is teachers, teachers, teachers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You got to recruit, train, and retain teachers. But if we're not paying teachers adequately or competitively, then it seems like we're not living the words that we're saying.
Absolutely, and that's why it is an important issue to resolve. And
right.
I think most districts are constrained in trying to figure that out. How do we pay our teachers at a rate that is going to get us the best teachers in the classroom for our students? I know that there are different ways of paying in terms of performance that right. Could yield better effects or be more effective for our students. But you still have to solve the issue of, you know, the baseline. You know, what is a sufficient wage just for what we expect from those professionals, as well as supporting them along that way and right. to develop them end their careers as they begin in teachers and sustain throughout the system. Because we know that professional development and securing, giving them the support, the working conditions, all of those things matter when teachers make decisions about whether they stay in the school system. Otherwise, you know, they'll be compelled to go into other industries. And right. for some, you know, for what we have to teach our students, we're becoming much more technically focused. So we really do need those sort of you know, math and science areas so that we can strengthen our core and what we offer our students. But you can't do so when you're competing with all these industries and the salaries that you're offering are just not competitive.
Right. Chairman Huberty, we've done this a number of times together, and
yep.
you know that my job is to remove the manhole cover and to usher you gently into the manhole. So,
I think last few times you pushed me down and stepped on me and put the cover back on.
Prepare to feel my hands
Let
on
it
your
on
back
fire.
Again.
Let's go.
We have an audience question that relates to school choice, and the question of whether the School Finance Commission will in any way make a recommendation at the conclusion that tax dollars ought to, as part of some broad school finance solution, be redirected to private entities without accountability. Call them vouchers, call it school choice, call it whatever you want. This was the altar on which the school finance proposal was sacrificed, was it not, during the last session? That when the Lieutenant Governor said to me in Houston, October 31st of 2016, no one without the other, meaning no school finance reform without school choice or education reform, as he called it, he was serious. We took him at his word, and he was serious. And that's, in fact, at least in part, a simplification, but not an unreasonable one, of what happened in the last session. Are we in definition of insanity territory here? Is it going to be the same thing again? And is the commission going to play a role in relitigating the school choice question?
I don't. Look, we've had different groups in front of us. We certainly have the charter schools in front of us, and I would say to you is that as we discuss this, we do have choice in the state of Texas. We have charter schools, we have magnet schools, we have IB programs, we have different things that are out there. Last legislative session in House Bill 21, we have 2 programs specifically for special needs, autism and dyslexia, where charters can partner with the school districts to create those programs, and we're going to study those and see where they're at. We have had some discussions about ESAs or whatever that you're going to call those during the commission meeting. We've had one discussion about that right now. We're getting into the work groups right now. You have outcome-based. I'm assuming that would be something that would be in the outcome-based channel of where Representative Bernal is at and Mr. Williams is at. and they're going to be talking about it. I don't think that you can't study the entirety of the system without looking at all the different things that are out there throughout the country. That's one of the things that we need to be doing and we're looking at.
Best practices.
Best practices, right. And is that a best practice? My view of that is that, you know, any taxpayer, and this is a conservative principle in my opinion, is that if you're going to put money, taxpayer dollars into a system, there needs to be an accountability system associated with that. Yeah. You can't just spend money and say, go ahead, spend it, we trust you. You know, where is that money going to go? You have to have an accountability system related to any taxpayer. We wouldn't build a road without an accountability system, right? Yeah. We wouldn't go, you know, I mean, look at what's happening at HHSC right now. Right. You know, there's accountability, right? They've made changes there. So those are things that are going to be taken into consideration. Now, obviously, you know, as Chairman Brister guides us down this path, and I think the commission has been very thoughtful about that. We're not telling anybody no. We're being open-minded. We're being thoughtful.
You're considering every option.
We're looking at everything just to say, does it make sense?
Yeah, and you know, so Chairman Huberty, when you said to me last February on the stage before the session really got going, school finance is dead on arrival.
Well, you said that. I didn't.
Well, but you know what? But you agreed.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we're clear who said what.
Okay, but you know what? I'm not the chairman. You are.
Yeah, right.
If you agree, that's like you saying it. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So, is school choice dead on arrival as a component of whatever work product this commission produces?
I think that we have to, again, I'm saying that we are going to look at every option, but there has to be accountability with everything that we do. Okay? There has to be accountability with everything that we have to do. One of the things that I was disappointed about, more particularly when we think about it, is the option for parents for the options for students with special needs.
Yeah.
And I think that we have very clearly failed those students in the state of Texas, albeit you look at what's happened.
But was that not the proposal that came over from the Senate?
No, that was. But there was no accountability standards that stuck with it.
It was a special needs.
There was a special needs program associated with it, but there was no.
But it was the accountability.
There's an accountability standard that goes with it, and there's got to be the partnerships. We've created those. I mean, look, in the state of Texas right now, we have private partnerships. You can actually go partner on a pre-K basis with private providers. You can actually partner with private providers for special needs students. So it's not like we don't have that there, but the one mechanism that we have, there's accountability associated with it.
And that's the issue.
And that's the issue.
Right, right. Let me ask Mr. Williams, Ms. Conley Johnson, how are they doing? I don't necessarily mean these two specifically, but from the outside, as advocates from the outside, does the legislature do a good job of managing this issue as far as you're concerned?
I'm going to let you go first.
It's not going to hurt our feelings.
I would prefer, for dramatic effect, that you look directly at them when you answer.
I think what I have found is that for something that takes half the budget, the knowledge base of what's happening in public schools is not as broad as I would like it to be. I think if you think about Representative Bernal, I bet he's probably been in 100 schools.
Well, he spent the whole last interim visiting every single school in his district.
That's right. Yeah. Chairman Huberty used to be the president of a school board. Yeah. They understand this issue. They understand what's going on.
Not everybody does.
But not everybody does.
Yeah.
Not everybody
Ms.
does.
Conley Johnson, do you see the right people in the right jobs at the right moment in the legislature doing what they ought to be doing?
I just have to be honest and say not in most cases. I think there's a few who get it. I mean, our colleague, here, I mean, they certainly understand the needs and they have a full understanding of the kinds of challenges and the complexities of the school finance system and the education system itself. But I also think that there's some interests that are, folks are just myopically focused on one thing or one particular interest, and it sort of gets in the way of being able to open the thoughts and the dialogue and the discord around treating some of these important issues around education. And so I think we're challenged with a large portion of the legislature, and unless there's a willingness, and I understand one of the benefits of being on this commission is now I have a better understanding and I understand the balancing across the state. I thought it was difficult to balance out the needs on a local school board with 9 members, but when you take that statewide and trying to balance out all these competing interests, it's difficult, it's complicated. Right. So I have a deep appreciation for what they do. Right. But on the other hand, I feel like the business case is so strong here, right? I mean, we talk about if we want to grow our economy, we want our students to meet our statewide goals. I mean, it doesn't take rocket surgery, as we say, to really figure out the need to invest in education and to put some time and attention into it. Right. I know that there's a political aversion to expanding expanding the tax base, but we have to have a diverse options or alternatives on the table if we are going to, really result in property tax relief. And so you kind of have to own up and face that we have to sort of put more into the system.
Let me ask Representative Bernal the inverse of that question, which is, does the education community and do the advocates like Mr. Williams ultimately do what they need to be doing to make your job possible, or do they get in your way and in their own way?
No, I don't think so at all. I think they're very helpful. I think that the challenge for the legislature is that we only hear from the groups. We hear from groups, we hear from superintendents, we hear from school board members. If we were to hear more from the people who live it every day, principals and teachers.
Parents.
But if we hear from, but especially the practitioners, because you can't argue with their life experience. I can say, oh, well, you should do it this way. Okay, well, that's not what it looks like in my classroom. Yeah. You can't argue with that. And I think that we need that voice of authority to move us in a different direction. Treetops talk to treetops, and that doesn't work in this case. We need to hear from principals and teachers. Districts need to allow their teachers to come to the legislature and testify to get that base level grassroots point of view, because I think that you can't argue with that. And we need to be able to be pushed on as opposed to always pushing back.
So we have time for one last quick question. I'm going to do this as a point of personal privilege, and I'm going to end as I began with Chairman Huberty. How important is the resolution of the speaker's race to this issue heading into next
I think it's very important.
Yeah.
I think clearly that that whoever the speaker will be, and we have four candidates out there now, and
possibly a dozen,
possibly
more right off stage,
a bunch more will be out there. And for me personally, because I've spent the last 14 years of my political life working on this particular issue, very important to me of how that person feels about that, and the decision. And are they going to be courageous, as Speaker Strauss has been, to be out and taking that position? Because I think it's very, very important for us to be able to say, we can fix this. Now, the good news is that in my conversations with Chairman Taylor, he wants to try and fix it too. He really does. I mean, if you don't know Larry, I mean, he's really sit there and say, look, I get it. We all went sideways last session. Let's figure this out. Let's work together, right? I mean, I think we all know that. Chairman Taylor is very serious about this and wants to fix this problem, and we're going to come up with a solution. And I've had conversations with Governor Patrick as well, and Governor Abbott. I mean, everybody gets that this is a serious problem. But we're going to have to make some really tough choices. And so whoever that speaker candidate is going to be, for me, is going to be somebody that's going to have to be courageous and stand up and say, this is the right thing to do, because as Mr. Williams said, is that if we continue down the same path that we're going to go, we are not going to have the educated society. And when you have situations where you want Amazon coming to Austin or Amazon coming to Dallas, and Google's down here now and their beautiful building, we're not going to have the skilled labor force that is required. And as I started out and said very early, we're either going to invest in them now or we're going to do it later. And so if we want to continue to be the #1 state or purportedly out there and say it's great to come to Texas, then we need to make Texas education system great. And my, again, litmus test will be whoever that speaker candidate is going to be needs to be like-minded of how many of us think. Education is a nonpartisan issue. And we had last legislative session with the finance bill that we had over 134 members of the House of Representatives, both Democrat and Republican, saying, yes, we need to fix this. And so my goal is when we go back, and that's one of the reasons I came back, is I want to fix this problem. I want to take a meaningful change with smart people like Nicole and Mr. Williams and Diego and the other members of it. And I know that Chairman Brister and I know Kevin Ellis, who's State Board of Education member who's on the committee, we are all thoughtful and dedicated. We sit and we're really trying to fix this problem. We really are. And I think that we're going to come out of this with some good work product. And I'm optimistic.
All right. That's always good to end on optimism, right? Please thank Representative Bernal, Chairman Huberty, Ms. Conley Johnson, Mr. Williams. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you again.